to another Americans for Limited Government live stream. I'm very excited today to be joined by Gabriella Hoffman. She is an independent contractor, a freelancer. She's also a good friend of mine. And what she's going to talk to us about today is two things that are happening right now. Number one, we have a record number of workers who are leaving the 9-to-5 workplace, and they're finding new freedom as freelancers. But then secondly, Joe Biden and the Democrats in Congress have legislation that would try to shut that down, make it harder for people to be self-employed entrepreneurs. So Gabriella is going to share with us her experience and just kind of what is going on right now with the gig economy. So welcome, Gabriella.
Thank you for having me, Kat. Happy to chat about this really exciting topic that's been sadly slipping under the radar for some time. So I'm glad organizations like yours are starting to give it more notice, especially as people start to propose unionized options to address the supply chain problems.
Well, I got interested in this just because I did a story for the Daily Torch here at Americans for Limited Government about the question that everyone has is, where are all these workers going? Like, we have a worker shortage in this country. And the Wall Street Journal found that the Labor Department data shows that what's happening is many of them are starting what you're doing. They're freelancing, gig economy, they're self-employed, they're single employee workplaces where they're saying, hey, look, I'm going to be working independently for myself, mostly from home. And so this is really where a lot of the American workers are going right now. And so it seems so strange that while this is becoming a popular option, the Democrats have legislation like the PRO Act that would make it harder for people to be independent contractors. What is the PRO Act and how would it affect workers?
The PRO Act has been billed as a pro-worker piece of legislation. It stands for the Protecting the Right to Organize Act because the supporters of that bill believe that there are insufficient protections for people who want to unionize. They believe that right now it's very impossible to unionize. However, in right-to-work states, you can unionize if you choose to do so, but you have the freedom to opt out of that option as well. In states where there are no right-to-work agreements, it's a lot harder to be independent of a union in most workplace settings. So this piece of legislation has been presented in two congressional cycles or sessions. Last session, they presented it. It passed in the House, did not move anywhere in the Senate. Currently, you have that same kind of level of progress with the bill. It passed the House with 5 Republican votes. Every Democrat vote except for one, Henry Cuellar from Texas, supported the PRO Act. And it has 3 key stipulations. There are actually a lot of very controversial and very damaging components to it for freelancers. But the 3 that stick out the most is, 1, it would undo right-to-work agreements in the 20-some-odd states that currently have them. It would make, as a condition of employment, you having to join a union a mandatory thing as a condition of employment, which would restrict freedoms. And 3, there would be a lot of potential privacy violations where if this were to pass, right to work were to go away, and also for an ABC test to be implemented, there's a current IRS test, which is the standard for determining whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee. Someone who either files as a 1099 filer or someone who files as a W-2 filer, respectively. And so the second provision that would happen, in addition to revoking right to work, let me correct myself there a little bit, would be to implement an ABC test, which has already started to take fold in California. And it's led to countless independent contractors, at least a few million, according to some estimates. I saw that within immediate implementation, about 1 million people were displaced, but I think it's a lot more now. Independent contractors have had to say no to work. They've had to stop contracts. They've had to settle on fewer contracts and fewer clientele because of these really stringent conditions. And I was talking a little bit about this, but I jumped ahead of myself. And a third thing would be that if right to work were to go away and independent contractors were forced to be reclassified as employees, then would come in this other imposition with the PRO Act in the form of a really invasive provision that would give unions oversight over your private information. You can't consent to what information you're going to hand over. Employers will be dictated by the stipulations of the law, if it were to pass, to hand over your private information you don't consent to. So there are a lot of privacy concerns with how much access unions could have potentially over your private information. And the reason why they're doing this, they're saying it's because of misclassification, that a lot of independent workers are really missing out on having benefits, whether in the form of dental or healthcare. But those are minor things. The real crux of it is to give a fledgling workforce, the unionized workforce, a boost artificially through government assistance because they're at a historic low. About 10.8% of the workforce is unionized compared to, let's say, 36% or 59 million people who partake in some form of flexible arrangement. So they don't like that the trends towards workplace environments are trending more towards flexible work arrangements or the freelancer economy, away from 9-to-5 jobs. So they want to embolden the government to essentially make it impossible for people to choose their path, choose their career path, obviously to keep unions alive despite their waning influence in this country. And it's quite sinister when you think about it, that the government wants to come in and determine how you can work. Essentially, it gives the IRS more power too. They're going to collect more revenue from us, more taxes. We already pay high enough taxes as a self-employed person. I pay 15% in the self-employment tax on top of state and federal income taxes for the work that I do. And so for them, it's a means to collect more information. It'll certainly affect your private information with that one component. It'll make it increasingly difficult for people to be independent workers and just make things a lot more chaotic in respect to entrepreneurship and really stifle this, I would say, form of deregulation. It's a method of work that government really cannot control right now, kind of like what they're trying to do with cryptocurrency and digital currency. They want to find ways to regulate it because it's confusing to them. They don't know how to implement certain measures to rein it in because it's kind of this unknown. They want to do the same thing to this sector of the workforce, to put more constraints on people and to give a boost to unions who have shown to be really corrupt. They don't know how to bargain for workers effectively. And overwhelmingly, all the dues go to Democratic candidates. So even unionized workers are getting a little sour, or they're souring a bit, excuse me, on union bosses as well. So it's not just independent workers, but you even find among people who are unionized. That's why the Janus case a few years ago was so critical, to not have your dues go to causes you don't support, in a nutshell. So that's kind of what the PRO Act is. And even if they're not able to pass it in Congress, right now there's a few holdouts from several Senate Democrats. I believe the 2 Arizona senators and Mark Warner of Virginia have said they can't support it in its current form, or they have contentions with the ABC test provision, or they just don't think that there's a path to passage. If they don't do this method, they're going to look to do regulatory fiat. They're going to look to the Department of Labor to potentially implement changes to labor law, whether it is striking down the IRS test for an ABC test, whether it is making it increasingly harder for people to choose to be independent contractors versus employees. And I could envision, if they wanted to make it extremely hard for right-to-work states to function. They could pass something that revokes it. I know that's probably very sinister. I don't think they can undo right-to-work legislation because that only can come in the form of congressional reforms. But they could implement little policies here and there to make it increasingly difficult, like I said, at least to identify as an independent contractor, file as one. They could, I think there's talk in the reconciliation bill to implement reforms when it comes to penalties, the employer penalties for those who mistreat or abuse unionized workers. That's what they've talked about, to kind of overcome the budgetary conditions that they can include, because in reconciliation, you can't do stuff relating to the budget.
Right.
They're trying to find loopholes to impose stiffer penalties on employees who they believe abuse unionized workers. And yeah, I could see aspects of the PRO Act be implemented by regulatory fiat if they're not able to succeed in Congress. Or we could see the court strike down any attempts by executive order.
Yeah, the reason I really want to make this point very clear to people, the reason why Americans for Limited Government is interested in these independent contractors and the PRO Act is because what Gabriella and these other independent workers represent is really the American entrepreneurial spirit. This is what has made America great. It is what continues to make America great. People like Gabriella who take a risk, go out on their own, invest in themselves, and start a small business and use their skills and talents to the best of, their ability to really maximize themselves and to, exercise their freedoms and liberties. And that's really the core of what makes America great and unique in the world. And Gabriella embodies that. And now we see legislation that would try to stifle that and make it harder for people to really prosper in that entrepreneurial way. And I want to share a short video, just a clip, to give you an example of the type of work that Gabriella does. Because when someone says they're in the gig economy or they're a freelancer, I mean, who knows? That could be just about anything today, right, Gabriella?
Yeah, there are different classifications for people who are gig workers or who are freelancers. So I am a self-employed independent contractor. That's kind of a repetition. But independent contractor is usually someone who works full-time doing this. It doesn't mean you are working less than someone who is in a 9-to-5 job. I do this full-time. I may work a little bit over the 9-to-5. Sometimes I may work less. It just depends on my workload for the day. But we choose to be in this position full-time because we can have multiple clients. There's also moonlighters, people who work full-time jobs, but also have side gigs or side hustles to supplement their 9-to-5 jobs. There's also part-time gig workers or part-time freelancers, several different classifications according to outlets like Upwork, which has a great report, which I've been very impatient with to see their new report. Their most recent report from September, their Freelance Forward report of 2020, found that there were 59 million Americans who partake in the gig economy or freelance economy. Like the Wall Street Journal article that you cited, since the beginning of the pandemic, they have noted that 500,000 people have entered the freelance economy. I think it's probably a lot more, especially as it ties into the Great Resignation. The Great Resignation, according to Upwork, which is a very good source on freelance type statistics, they cited and estimated that upwards of maybe 10 million Americans could potentially leave their traditional job and enter the freelance economy. We haven't seen those numbers quite yet. It's interesting that they've put out that 500,000 statistic. I think it could potentially be more. We don't know how to gauge that number quite yet. So I'm waiting for this Freelance Forward report, and it hasn't really been quantified. So we have to be a little bit patient with that. But people are going into this type of work setup because it proves to be more flexible. It proves to be more profitable if you put your mind and heart and soul into it, because you could go into freelancing and fail. That's a reality that I make known to people. Like, I've had success because I've passed that 3-year threshold that is recommended to see if you could make this a viable option for yourself. But if you have the skill set, you build up more skills, like something I've had to do, not just lean on basic skills that I've had. But if you build up your skill set, you run into great clientele, you get long-term, higher dollar clients, and you build trust among the people you work with or people you've worked with, and remind people in your orbit that you are a freelancer. You could really be successful and you could feel a lot more fulfilled and happier. And something I want to put out there as a statement, or kind of as a talking point for conservatives, this is a pro-family, pro-freedom policy to advance freelancing. I think we have to make that a bit more clear, because we do see some people on the right trying to say that we have to win over union support and kind of abandon our support for right to work to please like disgruntled workers. And I don't think you need to do that. I think that would actually be ill-advised if you do that. But this is a pro-family, pro-worker, pro-freedom policy. We want to talk about women having multiple options, being able to stay at home with their kids and still have a little bit of a career. Freelancing gives them that option while still being able to attend to their children's needs.
You are so right. I love everything you're saying, Gabriella. And I want to just play a clip of some of your recent work, because part of what you do as a freelancer is you produce digital content and multimedia. So here's something you did recently in Pennsylvania on fracking.
I've heard a lot about fracking today. Now it's time to see it up close and personal for myself.
Good job.
One thing's for sure, the people here love what they do and are passionate about providing energy through fracking in northwestern Pennsylvania.
I was fracking since I was 16 years old, 20 years now.
I think the hardest thing about fracking for myself is getting up early. Like this morning, I had to get up at like 2 o'clock to get out here. Yeah, but I mean, it's worth it once you get out here, because you try to beat the sun, because once it gets hot, it's awful. It's taxing a lot on your mind too. You have to pay close attention to what you're doing so you don't mess up.
On location, 4:30 in the morning before the sun comes up. Work all day,
8:30, 9 o'clock at night, watch the sun go down, get back to the shop, be back up in the morning.
Fracking plays an integral role in Pennsylvania, and companies like Cameron Energy desire to keep it alive for generations to come. In the next installment of Conservation Nation, I'll present part 2 of my visit to northwestern Pennsylvania, where I'll provide a in-depth and behind-the-scenes look into the issues surrounding fracking. Thanks so much for watching this installment. Stay tuned for part 2.
That was so fun. So you travel all over the country and you take on different jobs, helping people promote. That was fracking, but sometimes it's other things. I saw you were down in San Antonio doing something at a zoo. So you really get to experience a lot, it seems.
I do. And I am the determiner of my work scope. And it really is an empowering position to be in. And this just didn't come overnight. I've had to work hard at this. I had to start at the bottom when I left my full-time job. And I had a job that I took in between that was not desirable. It proved to be a really, really bad decision on my part. So I had to build up everything from the bottom, from scratch, all over again when I first decided to become a freelancer. And the fruits of my labor are materializing now. And the common refrain that you see from a lot of PROACT supporters is that most workers, these gig workers, these freelancers are exploited. And therefore, they need help in rescuing from us. And I want to tell them, I don't need any rescuing. I don't need you to negotiate on my behalf. I don't need you to come to my behest and represent me. I'm my best advocate. I'm my best negotiator. And I think other freelancers like myself have to remind these individuals that they are playing with fire with respect to trying to determine people's outcomes. It's not going to succeed. I think it's a huge infringement on your First Amendment rights, to different commerce clause, to different employment law. It's really sweeping. It's really grand. And it's going to have a lot of implications if the PRO Act were to succeed. And I think you're going to see as more people enter this type of work scope, they're going to enjoy it. And I think they're going to join us in opposing efforts like the PRO Act, efforts to force unionization options on independent contractors or those who work in flexible work arrangements. And it's only natural that more people discover kind of a distrust of government in this aspect. If people are distrustful of teachers' unions, what is to say they shouldn't be distrustful of unions that try to interfere in business affairs? I think you have to consistently apply that. And I urge fellow conservatives who are toying with the idea of pushing unionization writ large, you have to be cautious, because if you're saying don't trust the unions for one aspect of society, you have to equally apply it to another in the case of business. And so that isn't to say that union members and union workers are complicit in this. I think, like I said, a lot of them are very, very dismayed with union bosses, but they can't really do anything. And I think they're going to lose the most too through the efforts of the PRO Act, because they're going to have their private information at the behest of unions if they don't want to have their information taken. I also think it's going to create a chasm between those of us who are not unionized and those who are unionized, and really just make things a lot worse. And maybe more eloquently, I could put into words like this, that any type of big sweeping legislation like this that has a lot of different caveats and a lot of different provisions, it's going to have sweeping consequences too. Look to the example of California. They've implemented little parts of this, and it's displaced a huge sector of their workforce. And you know who's been the hardest hit? Actually, most of this, the most outspoken against this type of law are progressive Democrats in California, who have seen their livelihoods completely upended because of this law. And even though there have been exemptions applied to this law, it still hasn't rectified the problems. They can apply for exemption after exemption, but it's still eaten up at people's incomes. So imagine if this were to be applied nationwide, whether by Congress or by regulatory fiat. You can't undo a lot of congressional bills. I would say if they did implement aspects of it by regulatory fiat, we could use the court system to undo that. It's a little easier. I hate to think of worst case scenarios, but it's a lot easier to challenge by regulatory fiat rather than Congress, because Congress takes a while to implement and to overturn.
Yeah, everything you're describing, Gabriella, is kind of like a nightmare for limited government advocates. Yes. This is just a scenario of big government trying to squash the independent entrepreneurial spirit that is really the basis for American greatness. And you represent that so well. You're a lovely, wonderful spokesperson. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, in addition to all the great freelance work that keeps you busy, you are a visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. And I'm sure you're doing wonderful work for them. They're a great organization that really tries to promote a lot of the values that we do here at Americans for Limited Government, pro-growth policies that will help our country and help us remain free and independent people. So thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for sharing with us your expertise on the PRO Act. And if people want to find out more about you or even hire you for a freelance job, where would they go?
Well, first, if we're broadcasting on YouTube, head over to my YouTube channel. You can hit the subscribe button and follow my musings there. I have a new series coming out called Freedom and Freelancing, where we focus first on Virginia and the freelancing opportunities here and some of the really, really standout freelancers here that my viewers and I think the American public will really like to get to know. Some familiar faces, some people that are more behind the scenes. We spoke to people who are political, not political, from all walks of life. And we're going to be releasing a preview on Monday the 6th. And then we're going to release the first episode on December the 13th. Then our second episode will be on January 3rd. So find me there. And then on YouTube, if you're following from there, you can head over to the About page and you'll find all my social media links. On most social media platforms, I am denoted by a blue check mark, super easy to find me. I also have a podcast called the District of Conservation podcast, where you could learn about other areas that I work in, specifically conservation, the outdoors, wildlife, things of that sort. And I have a website, GabriellaHoffman.com. That's where you can find all of my client case studies, my past work, articles, podcasts, appearances, things of that sort. So I have a lot of information out there. You can also find my musings at both Independent Women's Forum and also Young Voices, where I regularly contribute to their blogs and also their op-ed contributors program, where I have written about the PRO Act as well. And I'll have a few more pieces coming out about the PRO Act in the coming weeks. So lots of information out there. Feel free to connect with me and I will do my best to answer any questions you may have.
You are fabulous. Thank you so much, Gabriella. We'll leave it at that. And thanks everyone for joining us for this Americans for Limited Government live stream. So we'll close that out. Thanks everyone. And thanks, Gabriella.
Thank you, Karen.